Spanish soldiers received a strange order in 1577: destroy every purple-flowered plant in conquered territories. Execute anyone found growing it. The crime was not rebellion or theft. The crime was cultivation of a grain that made populations too independent to control. This plant produced more food per acre than any European crop. It required no irrigation systems. It thrived in poor soil. It contained protein levels that eliminated need for livestock. Colonial records describe fields burned and farmers hanged for refusing to abandon it. The Spanish crown understood a principle modern food systems have forgotten: control the seeds, control the people. Yet 5 centuries later, this forbidden grain grows wild across every continent. It appears in vacant lots and highway margins. Agricultural extension agents classify it as invasive. Herbicide manufacturers target it in product marketing. The plant that once fed 15 million people now faces eradication a second time, not by kings, but by ignorance of its value. Amaranth operates through biological mechanisms that bypass every weakness of commercial grain crops. The root architecture penetrates 8 feet deep in its first season, accessing water tables beyond reach of shallow irrigation systems. This allows cultivation in regions where rainfall averages only 12 inches annually, half what wheat requires. The photosynthetic system uses C4 carbon fixation, the same pathway found in sugarcane and sorghum. This means heat above 90 degrees Celsius increases productivity instead of causing heat stress. Field measurements show Amaranth maintaining photosynthesis at temperatures that shut down corn and rice completely. The seed production capacity reaches 50,000 grains per plant, each containing 16% protein by weight. A 10-kg 10-foot plot produces 6 to 8 pounds of grain in 120 days with zero fertilizer input. Ancient agricultural records from the Inca show yields of 2,500 pounds per acre on mountain terraces at 11,000 feet elevation. Modern industrial wheat averages 3,000 pounds per acre, but requires massive irrigation, chemical inputs, and fertile lowland soils. The protein structure in amaranth grain contains a nutritional profile that challenges fundamental assumptions about food production. Analysis reveals lysine content at 5.1% of total protein, more than double the level in wheat at 2.2%. Lysine represents the limiting amino acid in grain-based diets, the factor that makes grains incomplete proteins requiring animal products or legume combinations for human health. But amaranth contains all 9 essential amino acids in ratios comparable to milk or eggs. This means a grain-only diet from amaranth meets complete human protein requirements without supplementation. Andean cultures understood this empirically, maintaining populations of 20 million people on primarily plant-based diets before European contact. The grain also contains 7 to 10% oil, double that of corn, with squalene concentrations at 6 to 8%. Squalene normally requires shark liver extraction and costs $400 per liter. Yet it appears naturally in amaranth at levels that make a daily serving significant for immune function. Modern nutrition science spent decades proving what Aztec farmers knew from direct observation. Environmental conditions that destroy conventional crops trigger productivity increases in amaranth through specialized stress response systems. When soil moisture drops below 40%, most plants close stomata and halt growth to conserve water. Amaranth increases root expansion rate and accelerates flowering to ensure seed production before terminal drought. Research measurements show drought-stressed amaranth producing 15% more grain than well-watered plants of commercial varieties. Heat stress follows similar patterns. Temperature above 95 degrees Celsius damages proteins in wheat and rice, reducing yields 10 to 15% for each degree above optimal range. Amaranth maintains full productivity to 105 degrees Celsius and survives short periods at 115 degrees Celsius with no permanent damage. This heat tolerance allowed cultivation across central Mexico, where summer temperatures regularly exceed 100 degrees Celsius. Ancient farmers timed plantings to align grain maturation with monsoon rains, but the plant produced harvestable seed even when seasonal patterns failed. Frost tolerance extends the growing range further. Established plants withstand light frosts to 28 degrees Celsius without dying back, unusual for a warm season grain. The nutrient acquisition system in Amaranth extracts minerals from soil through biological mechanisms that operate without synthetic inputs. While modern corn removes 150 pounds of nitrogen per acre and requires replacement through chemical fertilizer, Amaranth produces comparable yields removing only 60 pounds. The difference lies in nitrogen use efficiency, how effectively each pound of mineral converts to grain. Amaranth achieves 25 pounds of seed per pound of nitrogen absorbed, nearly double the efficiency of conventional grains. Phosphorus and potassium uptake follow similar patterns. The deep taproot reaches mineral layers 6 to 7 feet down, where calcium, magnesium, and trace elements concentrate. Mycorrhizal fungi colonize amaranth roots at densities 40% higher than typical grain associations, extending the effective root zone another 3 to 4 feet. This biological mining extracts minerals unavailable to crops dependent on surface fertilizer applications. Historical records from Aztec agriculture describe amaranth grown on exhausted maize fields as a restoration crop. The practice rebuilt soil fertility while producing food, a combination modern agriculture considers impossible. Archaeological evidence reveals cultivation techniques that maximized amaranth productivity using only observation and hand labor. Aztec farmers developed polyculture systems where amaranth grew between maize and bean plantings, utilizing vertical space and complementary root zones. The shade tolerance of young amaranth allowed establishment beneath taller crops, then rapid growth once canopy gaps appeared. Selection focused on seed retention, breeding varieties where ripe grain remained in seed heads rather than shattering and falling. This trait allowed harvest of entire plants at once instead of daily seed collection. Threshing occurred through simple beating. Dried plants struck inside woven baskets to release seed. The tiny grains separated from chaff through density winnowing, tossed on flat baskets where wind carried away lighter plant material. Processing required no machinery but achieved clean grain suitable for long-term storage. The varieties developed through this selection produced uniform flowering times, compact growth, and seed heads that dried evenly. Modern plant breeding using laboratory techniques has not significantly improved upon varieties maintained through traditional methods across 3,000 years. The destruction of amaranth cultivation was framed as religious necessity, but served purely economic control objectives. Spanish colonial authorities observed Aztec ceremonies using amaranth dough formed into figures representing deities. This provided justification under religious law to ban the crop as pagan practice. But contemporary records reveal the true concern. A 1582 letter from a colonial administrator states directly that populations growing amaranth remained too independent and difficult to govern. The grain allowed communities to maintain food security without participating in colonial trade systems. Farmers who refused wheat cultivation and Spanish tool purchases were flagged as resistant to proper authority. Systematic field burning eliminated seed sources across vast regions. Within 3 generations, amaranth shifted from dietary staple to remembered legend in most areas. The genetic diversity built through millennia of selection was reduced to a few surviving populations in remote mountains. This pattern repeated globally. British colonial authorities banned traditional millets in India for similar reasons. French colonial powers suppressed indigenous grain crops across West Africa. The goal was consistent: eliminate food crops that enabled independence from colonial economic systems. Despite centuries of suppression, Amaranth persists as wild populations across multiple continents through remarkable evolutionary resilience. Roadside stands in North America derive from three sources: escaped cultivation from surviving indigenous communities, grain imported as bird seed that germinated, and ornamental varieties gone feral. These wild types display the same nutritional properties and environmental adaptations as ancient cultivated forms. The plants appear as striking specimens, often reaching 7 feet tall with deep red or burgundy seed heads in late summer. A single mature plant produces 40,000 to 60,000 seeds, explaining the rapid spread once established. The categorization as noxious weed obscures the food value. A 20-foot stretch of roadside amaranth yields 3 to 5 pounds of harvestable grain, equivalent protein content to 12 pounds of beef. Foragers who recognize the species can harvest from abandoned lots, field edges, and disturbed ground anywhere summer temperatures exceed 75 degrees Celsius for 100 days. The genetic adaptation in these wild populations represents natural selection for local conditions across 400-plus years. Wild amaranth growing in Montana contains different cold tolerance than Texas populations, each optimized through environmental pressure. Reintroducing amaranth cultivation requires understanding its growth requirements and traditional management practices. Seeds sown directly into garden soil after last spring frost germinate within 5 to 7 days when temperatures reach 70 degrees. Initial growth appears minimal as the plant establishes its deep root system, but after 21 days, visible expansion accelerates to 2 to 3 inches per day. Spacing at 12-inch intervals allows adequate air circulation while maintaining density that shades out competing weeds. Water needs remain moderate, with weekly irrigation sufficient once plants exceed 8 inches height. The grain heads develop through summer, changing from green to red, gold, or cream, depending on variety. Harvest timing occurs when seeds release easily when rubbed between fingers, typically 100 to 120 days from planting. A small 50-square-foot patch produces 5 to 8 pounds of grain plus 10 to 15 pounds of edible leaves if harvested young. Traditional processing involves cutting entire plants, hanging to dry for 2 weeks, then beating inside a large container to release seeds. Winnowing separates grain from chaff using a shallow basket and gentle wind. The small seed size of amaranth, about 1 millimeter diameter, requires different preparation methods than conventional grains but offers unique culinary properties. Whole seeds toast in a dry skillet until they pop, creating a crunchy texture suitable for coating or mixing into baked goods. The popped grain adds protein to granola without requiring nuts. Ground into flour, amaranth blends at 20-25% ratio with wheat to improve bread protein while maintaining rise. Ancient recipes combined amaranth flour with honey to create dense energy cakes that remained edible for months without refrigeration. Cooked as hot cereal, the grain requires a 3.1 water ratio and 20 minutes of simmering to reach porridge consistency. The flavor profile is mild, slightly nutty, accepting both sweet and savory seasonings. Young leaves, harvested before flowering begins, contain 3–4% protein by weight, triple that of lettuce, with mineral content exceeding spinach. The leaves cook in 3 to 4 minutes or serve raw in salads. This dual-purpose quality meant traditional farmers extracted both grain and vegetable from a single planting, maximizing food production per area. Maintaining amaranth genetics for future seasons requires minimal intervention due to natural seed longevity and high production. Allowing 4 to 5 plants to mature completely and dry on the stalk ensures sufficient seed for extensive planting the following year. Seed heads cut when fully dry and placed in paper bags capture falling grain over the next weeks. Each plant produces enough seed to plant 200–300 square feet, meaning a small harvest provides multiplication capacity. Viability remains high for 5 to 7 years when stored in cool, dry conditions, longer than most garden vegetables. This durability made Amaranth ideal for community seed banks with no refrigeration or specialized storage required. Cross-pollination occurs freely between varieties when grown nearby, so isolation by 300 feet maintains pure lines. However, mixed genetics often increases environmental adaptability for homegrowers focused on food production rather than variety preservation. The ease of seed saving eliminates dependence on annual seed purchases, placing control directly in growers' hands. Historical records show indigenous communities maintaining Amaranth genetics through 500 years of colonial suppression by this simple practice. The persistence of Amaranth through centuries of active eradication demonstrates biological resilience that modern crops lack. Every attempt at elimination has failed. The plant adapts too quickly, produces too many seeds, survives too many conditions. This same resilience offers practical value as climate instability increases and industrial agriculture faces mounting challenges. Crops requiring precise conditions and heavy inputs become liabilities. Amaranth represents a proven alternative, tested across millennia and environments. Growing it reclaims food sovereignty unavailable through commodity systems. The knowledge required remains accessible through historical records and surviving traditional practices. Each garden plot becomes an act of agricultural resistance, recovering what was deliberately suppressed. The genetic potential that sustained the Aztec Empire still exists in those tiny seeds, waiting for conditions that allow it to function. Subscribe to explore more suppressed crops that challenge modern food systems and offer practical paths toward genuine food independence through direct cultivation and seed sovereignty.